Welcome once again to Booktalking, an ongoing series of varying frequency in which I, Kobo in Conversation producer Nathan Maharaj, get to speak with my co-host and Rakuten Kobo CEO Michael Tamblyn about stuff going on in the business of books. And today we are going meta. That is, we're talking about Meta. That is, the company Meta, the folks behind Instagram and Facebook and WhatsApp and Threads. Why, you ask? Why would these humble booksellers want to talk about this social media behemoth? Well, there's a new book by a former employee of the company. Michael, you've read the book. Can you tell us all about it?
I can. First of all, I love being categorized as a humble bookseller. I think that's like it's sort of it has this pervasive sense of harmlessness that I want to encourage people to underestimate me by. So I love it. Thank you. So the book is called Careless People, a cautionary tale of power, greed, and lost idealism by Sarah Wynne Williams. And Sarah Wynne Williams was a diplomat for New Zealand at the United Nations, which is a pretty good gig if you're a diplomat. And way back at the very beginning of Facebook, kind of 2009, 2010, she starts using Facebook the way a lot of us did, as a way to keep in touch with family far away. She was in Washington, D.C. She missed home in New Zealand, and Facebook was there to make those connections. But her use of it evolved into, as she put it, an unshakable belief that Facebook was going to change the world,
Mm.
which was not an uncommon feeling to have at the beginning of the social media revolution, right next to, wow, my family are really into their pets. Uh, there was this, there was just this sense that we're going to be able to connect everybody and everyone's going to know about everyone. And that's going to move the social and political and media and communication landscape in new and interesting ways. So she decides that what she wants to do is work at Facebook, and more specifically, that Facebook needs a diplomat, someone who can help navigate the international relationships with governments, help to figure out the policy issues that are going to crop up as Facebook's influence grows. So that's kind of how we start out.
And now, normally, if you and I were dying to talk about a new book, we have a process here, such as it is. I track down a publicist. We have them on the show, and one of us chats about it. We both read the book. We both work up a script, but we have a way of doing this. We know what to do when we get excited about a book. Sarah Wynne Williams is not going to be joining us on this show. She's not joining anybody on any book chat show. Why is that?
So it turns out that in the course of the book, Wynne Williams starts sharing things about Facebook that Facebook does not like. Uh, for example, because she's deep involved in the policy side of Facebook's operations, that means she's involved in content moderation and she's involved in doing outreach to heads of state and different governments. Her team does a lot of work with Sheryl Sandberg, accompanying her to Davos, briefing her on policy issues, and her team is doing the policy work, dealing with law enforcement and governments around the world. And and in the course of that, she learns a lot about how Facebook is learning, and over time starts to become more and more uncomfortable with what she sees. There's this general sense of, let's ignore what individual governments want to do. Let's assume that we're based in the US. That's the only law that we're answerable to, unless somebody really comes at us with targeted laws in another country. Let's use a uniform approach to every territory and refuse to deviate from it. This is all documented in the book.
Mm.
And that on its own is, I think, stuff that a lot of people know about Facebook. But where it really starts to get interesting is her direct relationships and um, and memories about working with Mark Zuckerberg and with Sheryl Sandberg. And the on the as far as Sheryl Sandberg goes, you you get a real disconnect between, this person who's really seen as a paragon of empowered women in the workplace. She wrote the book Lean In, and yet at the same time, maybe not a great boss. Treats some people badly, rewards others, does and says things that are in contrast or kind of in conflict with her writing in Lean In. You get these little episodes like Cheryl lying about, or allegedly lying about, a near miss of her being booked on an airplane that crashes. But she wasn't actually booked on that flight. She'd never been booked on that flight, but she kind of claims it anyway. You get this view into some of Facebook's more arbitrary and random launches of service like internet.org, which is going to bring internet to lots of unconnected countries, but actually doesn't end up amounting to anything. And then you get the the issues that Mark Zuckerberg is involved in. And through the book, he goes through this transformation from being, kind of the Mark Zuckerberg that I think we've kind of known from the beginning of Facebook, heads down, just interested in the engineering, doesn't care about politics or politicians, but over time starts to really care about them and starts to be very interested in Facebook's political influence. Um, Starts to see how Facebook can move elections around. And even, according to the book, starts to say, well, if I can move elections around, maybe I could become the president. And sets, if you kind of remember back a number of years, did this sort of listening and talking tour of the United States, which, according to the book, was kind of a setup for a potential presidential run. And you get little stuff like maybe he cheats at Settlers of Catan, or the people around him cheat for him. He wants to be in the center of rallies, or maybe even rallies that look like riots that could be organized for him to be in. But he's also getting more involved in moderation discussions, deciding what stories get suppressed, which ones get amplified, sometimes just based on who gets him on the phone. And he becomes very involved in the company's press to get into China. And the other part of the book that it seems like people are pretty exercised about inside Facebook is that it appears that he and his team were willing to make some extreme compromises to user privacy to get into China, including building tools that could target people with certain interests or affiliations, filtering out topics, or suppressing stories or content, and being willing to give that to the Chinese government in exchange for a way into China. And so we have stories about Cheryl, we have stories about Mark, and then we have stories about Joel Kaplan, who by the end of the book and still to this day is Facebook's VP of public policy. And he's referred to throughout the book as, someone who went to Harvard, is an ex-Marine. A lawyer. He clerked for Supreme Court Justice Scalia. He was deputy chief of staff for George W. Bush. Also, Sheryl Sandberg's ex-boyfriend, and a representative of the, bringing in some people from Republican politics and the right wing to help advise Facebook on like how to live and work in that world. And so he's characterized throughout the books for inappropriate remarks, for kind of generally being a jerk to the author, grinding against her at a company offsite, and eventually she asks for an HR investigation. Kaplan is cleared, and Sarah Wynne Williams is fired almost immediately afterwards for poor performance, and that's kind of how the book ends.
Okay, so that sounds like a lot of unpleasant things about some powerful people, but like people can tell those stories. There's such a thing as the gossip memoir. Um, you can talk to those authors. Why can't we talk to Wynne Williams about her story?
So even before the book comes out, Facebook wants this book stopped and goes to court, gets an injunction through an arbitrator, and it gets an emergency order. And the order prevents uh, Wynne Williams from promoting the book in any way. And it refers to part of the agreement that she signed when she left Meta that that barred her from making any disparaging or critical or otherwise detrimental comments related to Meta. So Meta came up with this agreement, said she agreed to sign this, and the arbitrator said, "Well, that's something that you signed. Until we get this sorted out, you're not allowed to promote the book in any way." Now, interestingly, the there was nothing um, in that order that prevented the publisher from selling the book,
Hmm.
which I think is not what Meta wanted. I think Meta really wanted the whole thing, kind of, buried in the ground.
Yeah, stop the presses.
Stop the presses. Didn't say that. Um, so Flatiron Books, which is a part of Macmillan, said, "Okay, well, I guess we're going to do this without the author." But what they did get instead is this incredible lift of publicity that has come up as a result of this legal back and forth. And so in a fantastic example of the Streisand effect,
Yeah,
where uh, publicity just adds fuel to the fire of a thing that maybe a lot of people wouldn't have paid attention to. There have been lots of tell-all biographies about Silicon Valley over the years, but now, well, if it's something that they want to stop, then this is something that people, get really interested in. Um, and there've been some interesting statements that have been put out. Meta says, their quote is, "The book is a mix of out of date and previously reported claims about the company and false accusations about our executives." And that's their spokesperson, Andy Stone, speaking. Miss Williams was fired for poor performance, he added, and an investigation at the time determined that she made misleading and unfounded allegations of harassment. So essentially, she accused her boss of harassment. HR investigation was done, didn't find anything, and so therefore
therefore
unfounded.
she's a troublemaker and out she goes.
She's a troublemaker and a disgruntled employee, and we don't have to listen to her. The publisher, um, Flatiron Books, has come out and said, "We are appalled by Meta's tactics to silence our author through the use of a non-disparagement clause in a severance agreement." And this is Marlena Bittner from Macmillan. "The book went through a thorough editing and vetting process, and we remain committed to publishing important books such as this." And what's fascinating about this whole story is that we have a couple of forces at work. We have an author and a publisher who are trying to get a story out to press, and so on one hand, there's always, I think, there's pressure on the author to, like, okay, I want to make sure I can get every interesting, scandal-worthy detail into the book that I can get. Uh, on the other hand, you have Meta, who, like, in some ways controls the news, is definitely in possession of the biggest possible megaphone that they want, and their reflexive attempt to try to squash this. Now, what's going on behind the scenes is, Meta's PR team has, like, spun up um, and gotten to work. So you have lots of people popping up from, former colleagues of Wynne Williams saying, "I was there and I don't remember that," or I never heard these things that she was talking about, or "I was there and I don't remember it that way." And lots of people coming to, Sheryl Sandberg's events.
Hmm.
And it's funny because I read it, and and I see a lot of what I can only describe as billionaire syndrome.
Mm.
I don't know if this is a fully documented syndrome, but
What do you mean by it?
uh,
I know what I think I
yeah,
mean by it. Is it this? So what I've understood by I've heard it referred to as like billionaire brainworms, which is that extraordinarily wealthy and powerful people don't on a regular basis meet with resistance or criticism, and that kind of part of their personality atrophies over time, and they become less able to engage with someone who says, I think you're wrong. And for most of us it's like, well, okay, so here's a disagreement. But for someone who's grown unaccustomed to that and may go months or years without it happening, it's a very different experience, and their reaction is then very different because they also have means.
exactly right. And I think just over time, an atrophying of impulse control.
Mhm.
And it turns out that when you reach a certain level of power, which is, by the way, a level of power that you or I will never come close to reaching. You have,
We do our best, Michael, to keep you from getting even like a minor case of the brainworms by
I would,
resisting you at every turn to make you
it's
feel like
true.
the least authoritative chief executive that ever there
Ex
was.
exactly. Thank you for that.
It's for your own good.
Thank you for thwarting my every impulse. And so you reach a certain level of power and you have fewer and fewer people who can put the brakes on you. And also, you have fewer and fewer people whose like kind of opinion you feel like you have to listen to or respect. And that can create some really odd impulsivity. And you kind of get that sense both in the depiction of Sheryl Sandberg, like here's a person who just isn't used to hearing no from people and therefore asks them to do all kinds of things that a regular person probably go, yeah, maybe I probably shouldn't ask that. I might look like a bit of an ass if I did that. And with Mark Zuckerberg as well, someone who is impulsive but also very sheltered by this tight group of people that are around him and shielding him and moderating his experience all the time.
And getting
He's
his first education in politics while he's simultaneously amassing tremendous power. Like he hasn't
yeah,
looked into he has no education in the humanities whatsoever, except what he begins to pick up after he's made his first billion.
right. Which I think is probably a terrible time to start exploring the humanities. Uh, and so all of this together like paints a number of unflattering unflattering portraits of the two, or really the two principles of Facebook, and then also of Kaplan. The other thing that comes out for me in this is that I think we're having a very different conversation about this book now than we would have had 3 or 4 years ago, where we had a very strong shift towards believing the victim in a sexual harassment situation of um, acknowledging that this isn't something that people generally make up or inflate, um, and that was becoming, or at least had the potential to be, more of a ground truth. Now we're flipping back to the way it used to be, where it's like disgruntled former employee and then lots of PR efforts to to discredit that. And I'm wondering how much of that is just baked into how Meta is and the culture inside it and this sort of notion of circling the wagons, how much of that is about the shifting political landscape that we find ourselves in, um, and how much of it is just like the reflexive motions of a PR team who's trying to protect their principles. And I don't mean like, sort of values principles. I mean the people that are paying them to protect them.
Yeah. I want to just circle back to something really quick because something people I think don't know, and it's hard to get information on this, is the extent to which publishers quote unquote fact check nonfiction. And you alluded to this briefly. What I understand happens is fact checking, not so much, more like liability scrubbing. Um, you'll find less that publishers are going to verify that every factual claim made is true, but more that it doesn't present a liability issue for them that this person is saying this, that they're operating, that they're not they're not publishing their way into an entirely predictable libel suit.
Right. And what we don't know here is to what degree did the publisher look at this book and go, okay, we're going up against some very powerful people and a very powerful company. Are we going to scrub this thing down to validate every event, every quote, every person who was there, um, and make sure that this is clean, clean, clean. Of course, doing that means contacting the principals in the book or
Mhm.
contacting people who are close to the principals of the book, which means you're tipping your hand about the book that you've got
Yep.
at the same time you're trying to get it out. How much do you rely on the author and their memory and, contemporaneous notes that they may have had or other resources that they have to kind of point back to these things. Um, it is really a judgment call on the part of the publisher how deep you go. I'm It would be surprising to me if Macmillan didn't really dig in on this one just because
Yeah.
of the both because of the claims that are made and because of the people that are involved. But that almost certainly had to be balanced out with we want to get this book out the door before the injunctions start to fly.
Yeah.
And that probably means you couldn't talk to absolutely everyone in every case. And some people would deny it too. So,
Mhm.
how do you balance that out? So all of this makes for both a book that we can't get an author to talk about, which would be the most interesting thing, because then you could really start to unpack some of this stuff. But it also means that we get to talk about the book a bit and get this very interesting window into the culture and the decision making processes in one of the most powerful companies in the world.
What what's Meta's relationship with publishers been like in the past? Is this a souring of a sweet romance, or has this always been rocky?
I th Well, interestingly, Meta's had not a lot to do with the book business up until very recently. Um, and, but they've had very rocky relationships with newspaper publishers. They've had
Mhm.
really rocky relationships with magazine publishers. There's always been this sense of Meta um, as kind of like the robber baron who has a dam up the river and they can turn the water supply on and off anytime they want to. And that's been the relationship of Meta to newspapers, the relationship of Meta to other kinds of publishers. But books generally haven't been a part of that. So, um, which probably gets us to our second story that really has Meta and authors and publishers in a proper copyright Donnybrook.
Yeah. So what authors I've been seeing authors getting really riled up about something called LibGen, which sounds like it was like in, the bad guy in RoboCop 3 or something.
Yes.
What is LibGen? Why is it making authors so angry right now?
So LibGen is probably something that, unless you're deep into BitTorrent and pirating books and searching around on the internet for free ways to get books, it probably is something that you've never heard of before. But it's shown up as a part of a number of different lawsuits that all got launched against Meta and against OpenAI going back to 2023. And what it is it's this database, this collection of, by some accounts, more than 7.5 million different books that were copied and are like contained in this archive, and it floats around on various pirate sites, and you can find it and you can download it. You can have 7.5 million books. All of these lawsuits that have popped up, and they're being launched by like a who's who of literature, which is
Yeah.
fantastic. So, like you have the case of Kadri v. Meta, which is a team up of Richard Kadri, who like wrote Sandman Slim and Butcher Bird, and Sarah Silverman, the comedian, and Juno Diaz and Christopher Golden. They're suing Meta in San Francisco federal court for breach of copyright using their books inside LibGen to train their AI model Llama. And
Mhm.
then there's another lawsuit that was kind of fired up just a little bit later in 2023 that is the Authors Guild, and they've sued OpenAI. And again, a who's who of authors: David Baldacci, Michael Connolly, Jonathan Franzen. Like, it's they did an anthology. It would
Yeah.
be a really good
I think
anthology. And it's
actual lawyer Scott Turow is also in there, I believe. Yeah.
yes, oh yeah, um, and they're together with the Authors Guild, and they're similarly suing OpenAI about the training of ChatGPT and the models that underpin it using copywritten authors' books.
And there's also what Meta versus Meta versus the Times, the New York Times. It's
Yes,
is it the same thing? Is this what we're seeing now? Is that the legacy publishers, not to, I mean, that term gets thrown around like it's a disparagement. It's obviously, I don't mean it that way. I've sold books my whole life. But that it's these new AI companies that are doing their um trawling, dragging the seafloor, harvesting, and now they're coming up against these people who have a reasonable claim to having laid what was on the seafloor, and
kind
that is their
of.
property,
Yeah.
and that is what's in the nets.
So the um, as these models came out in 2023, as you started to do queries on them, it turns out that you could get you could see things that led you to believe that, hey, they seem to have a lot of stuff in here that looks like it came from the New York Times,
Mhm.
or that, you could ask someone uh, to rewrite something in the voice of Sarah Silverman. How could you know what the voice of Sarah Silverman was unless you had a whole bunch of works inside it that had been written by Sarah Silverman? So that was what launched all of these cases. And Meta responded that its AI training was protected by the legal doctrine of fair use.
Hmm.
And fair use is a term in copyright that allows for the unauthorized use of copyrighted material, meaning you don't have to go and ask somebody to use it under certain circumstances. But those certain circumstances are usually things like I'm making a parody of something, or I am making a transformative work, like I'm taking information from this, but using it in an entirely new way to create a new work. And so Meta's argument was that its use was transformative. It was taking information in, but it was training Llama to serve as a personal they say it was their quote, serve as a personal tutor on nearly any subject, assist with creative ideation, and help users to generate business reports, translate conversations, analyze data, write code, and compose poems or letters to friends, end quote.
What a grab
um,
bag.
it's like we're going to take it and we're going to do all kinds of stuff with it. But what they emphasize is what it does not do is replicate plaintiffs' books or substitute for reading them. And so this is their way of saying we are not making it possible for people to copy books or to get the books back out. Everything that we do is a transformation. And the authors were not buying this at all. Essentially, they said, you wanted the stuff that was in these books, but instead of paying us, you just went out, you found pirated copies, you jammed them into your LLM, and you get everything that's inside them without having to pay. And so this lawsuit, churned on through to 2023, and at the end of 2023, November, Meta had nearly all of the claims against it dismissed in Kadri v. Meta.
Mhm.
The judge rejected the theory that generative language models themselves can constitute an infringement. Um, And but they kept one claim alive, which was the claim for direct copyright infringement, meaning that Meta breached copyrights by training its AI models on their books without asking them.
Hmm.
And so they've taken that piece of the claim and they're going for it. And then time has gone by, and in the meantime, like French publishers and authors, decided that they're taking Meta to court. We're seeing this kind of popping up in different jurisdictions, but it really started to get spicy on March 20th. Um, because on March 20th, all of these legal filings start coming out of the case.
Hmm.
Because it turns out that Meta employees like reached out to some companies about licensing books and licensing research papers, and they didn't like what they heard back. That it was, that they were going to want money, and that they were, that
They
it was
thought it
going to
was
be a
just like all this time, all this enmity, all of this business in the courts. It was really just about asking nicely. And if only they asked, they went back to Facebook HQ, and they're like, listen, guys, if we just ask nicely, all of this goes away. And it turns out asking nicely is necessary but insufficient.
necessary but insufficient. It's like this is going to take so long. It's going to take takes months to get the data out of them. Um, and what they saw was that if they started asking people, and certainly if they signed a license for any book, and the quote came up in the filing, the problem is that people don't realize that if we license one single book, we won't be able to lean into fair use strategy. This idea that, oh, we're just like we're transforming works. It's like if we license it, that means we know it has value. And we've said it has value and we've signed an agreement with somebody that gives it value. So we can't just go out there and get the dragnets and pull it all in.
Because
Other,
once we
yeah,
license one book, we have admitted that our application is not fair use.
that books should be licensed. Right.
It's extremely difficult then to distinguish between the book we licensed and how we're going to use it from the one we have not yet licensed and how we
Yep.
intend to use that.
And then other documents show up that have as a senior manager saying that that they thought it was really important to get book content, and that book content was more valuable in the training process than the stuff that they were scraping off the web. So like there was information inside books that they weren't going to be able to get anywhere else, and the quality of the information that they could get out of books was going to be better than the quality of the information that they could get off of the web. And so that combined with, oh, it's going to be really slow, and we're going to have to talk to lots of people and sign lots of contracts, and it's like, so then they just turned themselves towards LibGen and went, hey, well, there's 7.5 million books that we could get right here, and 81 million research papers at the same time. And there's a message that showed up in the court filings that shows that the team at Meta got permission from someone inside Facebook called MZ, which is apparently it seems like it could be a reference to CEO Mark Zuckerberg, to download it and just use the data set. And that they knew it was risky, and that they could maybe do some things to make it less risky, like taking out all of the copyright notifications so that Llama would never spit out, copyright 2025, Penguin Random House. So
Because
take
the
all of,
LLM would be like, well, I know how to write a book. Here's what you do. At the
right.
beginning, you get a title. Then you got a page where you clarify some legal matters of who owns the intellectual property.
Yes.
They're like, no, you skip that
Copyright
page, Llama.
HarperCollins Publishers in
Yeah,
2021.
that page is not for you, Llama.
Yeah. And then like maybe they'll do some things to fine tune the model so that it won't answer a query like, give me the first 3 pages of Harry Potter. So they've done all of this stuff. And then when this showed up in court, they tried to get the filings that all of this stuff came from sealed. This is, commercially sensitive. These are trade secrets. And the judge flat out rejected it, saying like, you just want to stay out of trouble. And as like this story got broke by the Atlantic and also by the New York Times, the Authors Guild itself was all over it. But what then added more gas to the fire was the Atlantic putting out a story that included a searchable database of what's inside LibGen. And this was like before that, you had to go on BitTorrent, you had to find this thing, you had
Yeah.
to download it. For a lot of authors, that felt really weird and creepy and probably illegal, and maybe you don't want to do that. And besides, the information inside it is kind of a big, messy tangle. Atlantic took all of that, formatted it all out, made it searchable, and then every author could go on and put in the name of their book.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, often their book was in there, including books that were from self-published authors, from
Mhm.
indie authors, books that had come from that were exclusive to sites, like all in there. And that has just raised the level of anger dedicated towards Meta to an absolute fever pitch.
So all of this material is stolen. Obviously, we can see this. This is how LibGen got filled up with all its stuff. Um, but the obvious thing here is that the Meta has continued. All of these Silicon Valley companies seem to do this. We saw this with Google Books cases, the OG of this, which we do not have time to get into. But they push through. And I guess what's clear is like the law is not a constraint if you've got enough money and you've got enough lawyers and you think you can probably, you can survive the impact with the wall because you're going to get through it. You're going to the law is just a construct and you can tear through it. And Google's ex-CEO, Eric Schmidt, has literally advised business school grads to like incorporate like this particular flavor of theft into like startup plans because you can make it big. This is part of the venture capital bet. If we make it big, then everything will be fine. You'll have the lawyers, they'll clean it
Mhm.
up, and this will be a new norm. I have to ask you, you are an MBA, you are a founder. How does this advice strike you?
Well, it's very much baked into Facebook's or Meta's move fast and break things kind of fundamental value,
Yeah.
but also in a lot of the growth plans that you saw in the post 2008 cohort of companies, whether that was Uber or Meta or OpenAI today. It was, if we can get big enough fast enough, um, and we can push through a bunch of laws, we will get on the other side of it being too valuable for them to shut us down. And
Mm.
then we'll use lawyers to like settle everything up and clean up the mess. And and that's kind of been the MO that the founders of OpenAI and certainly the folks that were running Meta seem to have been informed by as they were working on this. And it's um, there was I think the most recent episode of the Vergecast, which we can promote because they had me on the episode
Because you
before.
were on it. I was going to
Yeah,
say, was this the one that you were on? Is this the
not the
sideways
one that I
promo?
was on. This
Yeah.
is the one
Yeah.
after that.
Okay. Okay.
But their editor in chief, like Patel, who's an actual lawyer, talks about um, how there aren't a lot of like third rails when it comes to speech in the US. You can pretty much, get away with saying anything, but the one that has generally held is copyright.
Mm.
You can say anything you want, but if you copy a copyright holder, the courts do not like that, especially if it's Disney or Paramount or Penguin Random House or Sony Music. So we're coming up to what looks like a really big collision between the guardrails of copyright on one hand that says you don't get to go and kind of take somebody else's stuff, jam it into your thing, and then like kind of just use that without asking for it, and the intensely huge amounts of money that have been poured into AI.
Mm.
Because either this is all fair use and basically anyone can hoover anything copywritten into an LLM and kind of copyright doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
As
You can't copy it, but if you let your robot read the thing in its entirely
yeah,
and digest it completely, that's fine.
then you're fine.
Yeah.
Like that's one part of the fork in the road. Or the other one is that all of this value and all of these incredibly valuable companies are built on and kind of inextricably tied to this massive theft of intellectual property. And then how do you value those assets? You kind of have to make a bet that that this is somehow going to all go away, because otherwise you could end up with a big piece of OpenAI being owned by a whole bunch of angry authors, and that would just be fascinating. Like the idea of 10,000 really angry authors owning a big chunk of meta, like I would sign up for that reality show all day long. Um, but it's when we think about how much of today's stock market is kind of being propelled by AI investment and being propelled by the chip makers and the data centers and all of the other things that surround it. The idea that, hey, like all of these LLMs could have at their heart illegal assets that they shouldn't have in them. And then how do you unwind that? How do you unpack it, or how do you settle it out? Is going to be, the work of a generation of lawyers.
Yeah.
So this is going to be, must see legal viewing for the probably the next decade.
And it's going to be bigger than books, right? Because as we're thinking about it, we're talking about ingesting text, producing text, but it's only a matter of like, I guess, incremental development that Disney can see the writing on the wall here that if they lose this, if it turns out that LLMs are fine, you can stuff anything you want into these models, that the whole idea of a feature film, like people just hit a button and the machine will make a feature film and it'll be comparable to something from Pixar. Like there will be no new intellectual property. There'll be no reason to make it. It'll upend like this is tech versus media, like capital T, capital M.
Mhm. Absolutely right. And the only the only guardrails right now seem to be when um, when the person complaining about it is beloved enough or famous enough. So, for example, just in the last few days, OpenAI updated their model and it quite proudly announced, like now you can make images like in the style of Studio Ghibli, of My Neighbor Totoro and Princess Mononoke, and Miyazaki owns Studio Ghibli, has been very upfront about just hating AI and its ability to commoditize the work of skilled creators. And so they were really like sticking their arm into the lion's mouth and going, this guy here who hates AI, we just updated our models so we can make his stuff too. And he's come out against it. All kinds of people have come out against it. And they just, I think today, announced that, well, we're turning off the ability to specifically make Studio Ghibli works. But whatever it is that allowed you to do that is
Yeah.
still in there.
Yeah.
And there's probably, there's an argument to say maybe they never looked at the movies at all, but they looked at all of the fan art and the, graphs and all the stuff that lives out there on the web and trained it on that. Okay, like that's, Totoro was still Totoro and it was still made by this one studio. Um, but like right now, that's the remedy. The remedy is, you get loud and they can decide to turn it off, but it's all still in there. And it's all still in there for all of this copywritten work. So nobody knows how this is going to play out. And certainly there's a lot of lobbying going on in Washington right now, which has become, shall we say, a more transactional place than it used to be. Um, that,
Openly
you know,
transactional, certainly.
yeah, that, you know, probably people who are adjacent to or invested in the AI space are trying to say, maybe we can just like get a legal pass on this. Maybe we can get someone to create an executive order or a ruling that all of this stuff we did is fine because we've created all kinds of new technology and value. Like that, I think is both the fear that lives inside publishers right now is that they may just have this case like knocked out from under them. And is the hope on the part of AI investors, because otherwise it's kind of like there's toxic waste inside the models that they're not going to be able to get out.
Yeah. So I think our concluding thought on this is that everyone should spend less time on social media. They should back away from the internet, and they should go read Sarah Wynne Williams's memoir, Careless People, A Cautionary Tale of Power, Greed, and Lost Idealism.
And you can decide for yourself based on everything that you know about Sheryl Sandberg and Mark Zuckerberg whether it rings true for you.
Yeah. Wow. This is a lot. It's a lot to chew on. Thank you for bringing it to the table for everyone to think about.
I'm hoping that we get some book news coming up that maybe doesn't have anything to do with AI, like in the next while. I don't know, like authors get into a fist fight or like something, something kind of
I'm gonna go.
substantial
I'm
and
gonna go
physical.
ask ChatGPT. Is there been any recent book news that wasn't about AI? We'll see if that is that allowed. Is that
So my parting thought on this, as we talk about the risks of AI to publishers, was I was getting my outline together and I was talking about it. I'd read the book. I thought, it would be good. It'd be good just to have like a couple of sentences of summary of each of the chapters. I went to ChatGPT and I said, can you give me a summary of the chapters of this book? I'm like, it probably shouldn't be able to do this, but it says it's going out to the web. It's reaching for it. ChatGPT 4.0, and it completely hallucinated the table of contents of the
it was
book. Like
it was a 10-year-old doing a book report and had not read Charlotte's Web.
names of chapters that did not exist. The book only had 6 chapters. Like none of the chapters that were there were ones that were actually in the book. I was like, wow. Okay. So on the one hand, if we're really worried, we've got a ways to go. But on the other hand, it was certainly willing to try. And if it had the book in hand, I'm sure it would have done a much better job. I should have tried, a book from 20 years ago that was probably in LibGen and see how it would have done. Anyway, it's a brave new world.
It's a brave new world. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Nathan.